Ultra-fast fashion companies sell cheap clothes in huge volumes and make massive profits. Now, Asia-based clothing giant Shein is trying to list its shares on the London Stock Exchange. But why are some European countries opposed to their business models? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, France and other European countries are proposing measures to rein in fast fashion platforms such as Shein and Temu. They're worried about the effect these rapidly growing companies have on ecosystems and local economies. But what else is driving these measures?
You've heard of fast fashion, but these companies operate at warp speed. Among the world's fastest growing startups, brands such as Shein, founded in China but now based in Singapore, pump up more than 7,000 items a day, and they're dirt cheap. These Asian fashion giants have created a seamless ecosystem of online shopping, marketing, and social media, tailored to individual users, of course. Legacy brands like H&M, which produces a measly 23,000 items in a year on average, work by trying to anticipate trends season by season rather than in real time like Shein does. Shein's revenues are reportedly soaring. Some analysts expect them to jump by an estimated 55% this year compared to 2023. But Western regulators and industry heads are becoming increasingly uncomfortable with its business model. They say they're worried about its labour practices and environmental impact.
It's one of the most harmful industries in the world to the planet, and I don't think enough people really know that.
According to the European Parliament, the fashion sector accounts for about 10% of global carbon emissions. That's more than the total output of the shipping and aviation industries. Ultra-fast fashion has speeded up the retail cycle several times over. Europeans buy 26 kilograms of clothes per person every year, but bin 11 kilograms of them, and only 1% of items bought are ever recycled. France, Austria, Finland and the Netherlands have proposed a bill to impose levies on fast fashion clothes to put a lid on waste. The ruling would mean that Shein would be slapped with a penalty of roughly $10 per item by 2030. In March, France's lower house approved a bill that would limit advertising for these fashion platforms. Meanwhile, textile associations in Europe have accused Shein of flooding their markets with cheap garments local producers just can't compete with. They want the European Union to abolish a tax break for parcels entering the EU worth less than $162. In November, Shein filed for an initial public offering in the US but faced resistance. And now it is reportedly trying for a London IPO or a Hong Kong listing if that fails. But with Shein making tops for as little as $5 a piece, their runway success so far seems almost unstoppable.
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Dublin is Nazia Naheed Husain. She's a product manager at the Institute of Sustainability Studies. In Wiltshire, in the UK, is Safia Minney. She is founder of Fashion Declares, a group that campaigns for greater sustainability in the clothing industry. Safia is also the author of several books, including Regenerative Fashion. And here with me in the studio is Andrew Leung. He is an independent strategist on China. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Nazia, I'll come to you first. I mean, we all love a bargain, but at what cost to the environment?
Thank you, Edna, for inviting me to join today's panel. It's a pleasure to join you and my fellow panelists from Dublin. Well, fast fashion companies generally operate on a business model that really prioritizes rapid production, low costs, and higher turnover of trendy clothing items. So the companies are characterized by their ability to quickly replicate fashion trends and bring them to the market at a fraction of the cost of traditional retailers. And generally, the core of this model is a supply chain that's both highly efficient and flexible. However, this approach has significant environmental consequences. the rapid production cycles and the focus on sort of the low-cost manufacturing leads to substantial waste and pollution and just contributes to the broader environmental crisis. So that's the price that we are paying to the planet because of companies that are just working on this sort of recurring business model that is just prioritizing rapid production.
Safia, just come in on the environmental damage. In your experience, just how bad is it what these companies do?
Well, I think that we're clear now that between 4 to 10% of total greenhouse gas emissions is down to fashion and textile production. And that if we're looking, for example, at fresh water use, then it's about 20% of all water use is used for textile. But I think, when we are in a climate, ecological and social crisis where we are looking to transition away from fossil fuels, when we recognise that more than 2/3 of all fabric, all materials used are actually fossil fuel derived, polyesters, nylons, etc., we realise that the true environmental impact of fashion is huge. And of course, there are also, as my colleague said, there are these narratives that are being built up, which is about purchasing something that can be disposed of very quickly, sometimes even without wearing it, once or more, again, which is really the opposite to the kinds of messaging and narratives that we should be building in a world where we're looking at simplifying and looking at sustainable living patterns. So I think there's a twofold. There's not just the environmental degradation, but there's a kind of psychological degradation that we simply cannot afford at this stage.
Andrew, I'll come to you. That's quite a shocking figure, isn't it? 10% of global carbon emissions are coming from the fashion industry. So that's more than flying and shipping combined. I mean, a lot of people don't understand the impact fast fashion is having on our planet.
Well, true. I mean, does everyone need to have 10 T-shirts, for example? Does anyone need to have the whole wardrobe of different clothes? So it speaks to a kind of a lifestyle that is clearly not sustainable. And this is driven by, of course, the rise of the so-called middle class. Previously, a lot of people, had barely enough to eat, and then let alone having T-shirts. But now more and more people feel that they can afford more without realizing the impact on the environment. And also this is made worse by how companies outsource their production because they go where the costs are lowest, where there is the need to comply with environmental standards are more lax. So they just cut corners. And this is speeded up by a very fast and efficient supply and value chain that connects the whole world together. With not only with shipments, but with fast delivery systems connected by the internet, by social media. And you can place an order using your TikTok account or whatever account on your mobile phone and pay for it on your phone, and the things can get delivered to you in less than a week. So this speeds up the whole process without realizing the impact on the environment. So I think it's a global issue. It's not just Shein. There are other companies also cutting corners. And I think a great deal needs to be done. But it's easier said than done because, as I said, a lot of people feel that they're now, they're at least entitled to some of the so-called small luxuries in life.
Andrew, can I just ask you as well, the company Shein, founded in China, a lot of the media coverage, certainly in Europe and in the United Kingdom, can be quite negative about this one particular company. Do you feel it's driven by xenophobia? Is there a problem there with a Chinese company being very successful?
When it rides on the crest of a global campaign to blacken China's, or you can call it xenophobia, because China is rising and its influence is spreading for better or for worse, and seen from by different stakeholders. So I think this is part of that. But as I said at the beginning, it's not just China, it's a global issue. It's a global issue for rising middle class, rising consumers who just want more without realizing that less could be more.
Just at this point, I want to say we did invite Shein and Temu to send a representative to appear on Roundtable. We also asked the companies to comment on the accusations and allegations of environmental damage and unfair labour practices that is their business model and what it allegedly creates. The company has not replied to our queries. Nazia, I want to come back to you. Talk to me about Microtrends. How much of an impact are they having? What are they to begin with?
So Emma, I just feel that microtrends are something that influencers pick up very quickly, because they play this very significant role in its proliferation, particularly among young teenagers. They're just more impressionable and they're influenced by social media. And the rapid pace at which these trends get introduced and then discarded drives that demand for fast fashion, and it just creates this vicious cycle of consumption and waste. And somehow teenagers, they're the target demographic for that. They're especially vulnerable to the pressures of keeping up with these ever-changing fashion trends. So this not only impacts their spending habits, but it also fosters a very disposable mentality towards clothing where items are just viewed as temporary rather than valuable. I also feel that influencers, they're a visible part of this problem of micro trends, but they blame somehow cannot just rely on them. Fast fashion companies, of course, create this infrastructure that allows these micro trends to flourish by producing cheap and just trendy clothing at breakneck speeds. So however, influencers do bear the responsibility for their role in normalizing this rapid consumption of fashion. They also have that potential to shift the narrative by promoting more sustainable fashion choices.
Safia, I just want to come to you on that. Micro trends, what's your impression of them?
Well, microtrends come at a huge cost, and having spent the last 3 decades going into supply chains, looking at the most unsustainable in terms of both environmental and human rights costs. Indeed, modern day slavery and reporting on what modern day slavery looks like within our supply chains. Clearly this comes at a huge cost, and I think that there's been a lot of discussion around the fashion space about the importance of the Shein IPO not going ahead on the London Stock Exchange because of the significant human rights, supply chain and environmental concerns. And despite the pressure that's been put on Shein, calling them to really improve their both policies and processes, that there is still no evidence that the supply chains have been cleaned up, that workers are not still working 16, 17 hours a day with maybe 1 day leave every month. It's an appalling situation, and of course most of these micro trends are driving fossil fuel consumption. They are propping up the dependency that we have on oil and fossil fuels when we should be moving away from them. So, these micro trends, they're a certain section of the population. There are bigger issues there. Certainly when we look at the kind of gamifying, the stickiness of the kinds of advertising campaign that are being used, I'm sure in the future we'll come to ask ethical questions about that in itself.
Safia, just give me your opinion then on these influencers. I mean, if they are driving micro trends on social media, have we reached a stage where they need to be regulated or policed, or how do we deal with them?
Well, the best way is to regulate the companies themselves. And I think, we in Britain, for example, we need to align with the EU regulation and legislation that's coming in. These directives include, for example, the extended producer responsibility schemes, anti-greenwashing regulation, for example, which will really hold businesses accountable and create a level playing field. Because we have fast fashion brands here, some of whom are beginning to start to decarbonize their supply chains and to really begin to look at what ethical practice could look like, and how can they possibly compete when we have businesses like Shein with this new level of bad practice. It simply is undermining British and other businesses' competitiveness in the global marketplace. So it's not really a question of how can we stop influencers. They're often not wealthy people themselves. Maybe they don't have choices and they've gone for this because this is the only kind of work they can get. We need to legislate the businesses themselves. It is not acceptable in 2024 to allow businesses like this to practice things that are totally against the Sustainable Development Goals, that are totally against the UN principles.
Andrew, it's fiendishly clever what they do, these companies. I mean, Taylor Swift, for example, currently on her huge tour around the world in the UK this week. So she will wear a T-shirt, say, on a Monday, and by Wednesday, it's available to buy a cheaper knockoff version of it for literally pennies. I mean, these companies move very, very quickly, don't they?
Well, that's consumerism, advertising, because advertising is just to induce more consumers to spend more. And that's how the industry thrives. But I think that as I said, there are all sorts of very serious issues. But behind it all, there is a trade-off. Don't forget that all these outsourced production, they're all over the world. They're in India, they're in Bangladesh, they're in Africa. And of course, the companies that operate those production processes, they like to cut corners. But of course, if there are higher standards, the cost will be higher, and a lot of the people can't afford them and will be out of a job. And then these poor people, they have to, all they know how to do is, to, for example, harvesting cotton, for example, is also a big industry, feeding many more mouths. So I think that there are trade-offs. I think it's important to bear in mind that on the one hand, climate change is, of course, a very serious problem affecting everybody. But of course, the livelihood, a lot of the people, especially in the poor developing world, could be at stake. So I think that it's not as simple as that, as either black or white. It's got to be carefully addressed.
So how much responsibility as consumers do we have to start thinking, do I really need that T-shirt? Do I need to be buying that blouse, whatever?
Well, I think that this is a mindset which is very, very important. The mindset that says less could be more. For example, you look at how the design, for example, the Japanese kind of design puts a lot of emphasis on simplicity. So simplicity could be elegant. And it doesn't mean that you wear more or you have more choices would make you a more elegant person. But if you are a person that cares for the environment, it exudes from your whole personality, then it says a lot more than many more clothes you wear or the size of your wardrobe.
Nazia, I want to come to you on that. Consumer responsibility. I mean, we all have a responsibility to not be buying stuff so cheaply and so often, because a lot of this ends up in landfill within a matter of weeks.
I agree, and I agree with my colleague that less is more. And I think just consumers bear significant responsibility in the fast fashion cycle, as their purchasing decisions directly influence the market. So the concept of consumer responsibility is really rooted in that idea that every purchase is a vote for the kind of world that we all want to live in. So by choosing to support ethical and sustainable fashion brands, consumers just help to reduce the environmental and social damage that's caused by the fast fashion industry. However, I'd like to add that the responsibility is not just solely on the consumers. The fast fashion model is designed to sort of exploit consumer behavior. So using low prices and this constant newness and aggressive marketing to really encourage frequent purchases. And unfortunately, many consumers, particularly those in the lower income brackets, may feel that they have limited options and that they're just drawn to fast fashion as the solution. So that said, consumer responsibility is about really making the best possible choices with one's needs.
Safia, can I just ask you, do you think there needs to be an education awareness campaign around this issue so that young consumers in particular, that when they do see something popping up on social media and being copied and available to purchase for very, very little money in 48 hours, since their pop star hero has been wearing it, that they can understand the environmental impact of their purchases?
Increasingly, there are sustainable fashion influencers that are questioning the issues and guiding their audiences to shop secondhand, to use apps like Good on You, for example, to find better brands and better choices. I think we need to recognise that it is possible to create a just transition for the fashion and textile industry. I've been doing some research in India and Bangladesh, which shows how many suppliers are actually working to incorporate low impact materials, which might include organic, fair trade, regenerative cotton and alternatives to animal leather, for example, that have switched to renewable energy that are running with ZDHC water processing to reduce the amount of water used by as much as 97%. So, when I show the supply chain videos, just how we could be organising our textile and fashion industry, people are surprised. Even people within the fashion industry itself don't yet fully understand the impact of supply chains and how we can change it. So yes, I agree, education is needed, but we also need to kind of step back and say, look, it's our lifestyles in the global north that have created the climate breakdown that we're seeing today. And for parity, we need to support people within fashion's global supply chains. If we look at the Higher Ground report with Schroders Bank, for example, they track how the wet bulb temperature will be increasing in those production centres from 29 degrees to 31.5 degrees by 2030. It's just around the corner. So we need to come back to the bigger issues, which are that we need to move towards a just transition, and that needs to be done at the same time as massively reducing production and consumption of fashion. And some economists now say that will be about 95% of overall production. So moving from 150 billion garments produced new each year to maybe as little as 10 to 15 billion new garments a year. We have enough clothes on the planet now to sustain ourselves for more than 5-6 generations. So we need to think very, very differently. Now, absolutely right. We need education around those new framings, those new economic and business models.
And Safia, I would just want your opinion on secondhand clothing or pre-owned vintage. I mean, there's quite a growing market in the UK around that, isn't there?
Yes, it's absolutely huge. But again, Trade, Oxfam, some of the largest charity shops will be the first to call for better quality new clothing, because the stuff that's coming through now often is unsellable. As we know, a lot of it, simply ends up being dumped in Africa or in Latin America, in Chile and other countries. So we really need to improve the quality. And coming back to Andrew's point, quality clothing, things that we're going to treasure, things that we're going to spend the time and natural resources to make properly and wear for a long time.
Andrew, I just want to ask you the question. Your country, China, a lot of people will point the finger at China, Chinese companies, Chinese business people. How much blame should China accept for where we are with fast fashion?
Well, I think that in the old days, of course, there is a lot of polluting industries in China outsourced by Western entrepreneurs because they want to cut corners. And the easiest thing is to move the kind of polluting industries to countries that have to accept them because they want to generate the jobs. And there are millions of people who need to be employed. But now the situation has changed dramatically in China. China is now leading in the world's green industries. And then the Chinese middle class is rising. And the more polluting industries are now moving to other developing nations in sub-Saharan Africa, in the rest of East Asia, and so on. So I think it's a worldwide phenomenon that cannot be just put on the footsteps of China. But of course, China is not, has still environmental issues, but these issues are becoming top priority for the government, because the rising middle class in China, they demand not only quantity, they now want higher quality of life, including blue skies and cleaner waters and so on. So this is driving China's leadership, because at the end of the day, their legitimacy depends on delivering, on meeting the wishes of this rising middle class, putting more emphasis on the environment.
Thanks, Andrew. Nazia, I want to come back to you. What's the one major change you would like to see happen then this year, next year, to get a handle on fast fashion?
I think proposing something as an alternative would be possibly just slowing down, just looking at ultra fast fashion and the opposite of it, which is just taking it slow. And I think the EU's textile strategy, for instance, is really encouraging that adoption of circular business models. So, we were talking about things like clothing, rental services, repair and resale markets. So it's that growing slow fashion movement, which offers a very viable alternative because it emphasizes quality over quantity and really prioritizes ethical production. I think we also need to acknowledge that not everyone has access to or can really afford sustainable fashion options. So it's essential that in the next few months and the years to come, we just advocate for broader accessibility to sustainable fashion, ensuring that it's not just a luxury for the few, but it's also an option for all. Supporting initiatives that make sustainable fashion more affordable and available to a wider audience is going to be an extremely important step in this direction.
Safia, Nazia and Andrew, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World, and if you like what you see there, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.